is the children of Abraham, the ancient forefather. And as you can tell by now, our two guests are people who have become Jews at some point in their life. First, let's get a little bit of your background. Where do you come from? What kind of families do you come from? Where do you come from?
Well, 100 years ago, I was living in Chicago. I grew up in a very traditional Catholic home. By that I mean not only did my parents attend services, they were very involved with the community. My father was a stalwart of the church, etc. My brother had studied to become a priest. My sister had a Catholic education until she completed college, and I had a Catholic education until my second year in college, at which point I had literally lost my faith and had to find another avenue. I think that was the turning point, and I had to then begin my search for another religion, another balance wheel. But my family was very traditional, and so the decision was very difficult.
How did you first get interested in exploring Judaism?
It was really a process. When I lost my faith, I had to find something. So I started looking at all the religions, and I took comparative religion courses and focused eventually on Judaism, and it was an evolving kind of thing, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And then I began working with a rabbi, and I studied for about 2 or 2.5 years. And then I knew that this is where I belonged, and there was a comfort level, and then I was formally converted.
Pat, how about your background? Where do you come from?
Well, I also come from a Catholic background, but it wasn't a Roman Catholic background. It was National Catholic, which is not a very well-known branch of Catholicism. And although I don't know the exact figures, I would always tend to believe that it was even a smaller minority than Judaism. The likelihood of my finding a mate who was also a National Catholic was rather slim. I had also been raised similar to Pam in that my parents were regular churchgoers. My father was a congregation president. They were very active. Every week we were in church. I found that when I got to be a teenager, there was some question as to how much of a Catholic I was, but I still continued to go to church because that was my background. When I met Norman, who was now my husband, at the time, it was the first time I had ever met anybody who had dated anyone who was Jewish. I did not at the time even think about the possibility of changing from what I had been brought up, but I knew that his belief was stronger than mine. And when we decided that we would probably like to get married, I always felt that if I had children, I would tend to raise them in the Jewish faith because his background and belief was stronger than mine. I didn't really intend to continue in Catholicism because I was not totally believing everything that the Catholic faith had been based on. So it so happened that we had gotten married. We were married in a civil ceremony. We then were living together about 4 years married when we had a child, and it came to the decision as to how to raise the child. And we had just moved into Clark at the time. We came in at the same time that Rabbi Porath first came to Temple Beth Or. We just seemed to come at that same time. I approached him and I asked him at that time, what should I do if I wanted to raise my child Jewish? And he had told me that it was important that a mother understand Judaism in order to pass it on to a child. So at that time I first started classes with him. I started going to just a general adult education class. And it was entitled Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Being Jewish But Were Afraid to Ask. And it was also teamed up with the fact that the only other Jewish person I really had known in town was a neighbor who said that she was going to the class that was being offered an hour earlier, which was basic Hebrew reading. And she said, if you'd like to go together, if you come with me to the Hebrew class, I'll go with you to the other class. And rather than go alone, I said, sure, I'll go along with you. So there I was in a Hebrew reading class in addition to the other. And that started the whole process for me in education, learning about Judaism, because up until that point I really knew very little. And then, of course, in order to practice the Hebrew that I was learning in the class, then we started to go to services so that we could, follow along, in the book. And it just went from there until 2 years later. It was also the same as Pam. About 2 years later, I found that I knew so much about Judaism, and our social group was evolving around the temple, that it almost became the fact that I was living Jewishly, that the technicality of actually going through a conversion was just an obvious type of thing. But not pressured, never pressured. The rabbi would ask me, well, so what do you think? Are you interested? But not really a pressured situation that it was necessary.
How did your family take it?
I had a fairly receptive situation. I think probably one of the most difficult things was in order to approach my mother and tell her that I was going to convert. I think I created more of it in my mind than it actually, in actuality, was not really a problem. I did keep putting it off. I knew I had to say something to her and tell her, and it became very difficult till I finally sat down with her and I told her, and she very simply said, well, I'll always still think of you in the same way. I mean, to me, you're still, my daughter, and you're still Catholic because that's the way I raised you. But it was somewhat of an easier adjustment for her than I really had anticipated. But at that point, you have to realize I had been married to Norman 6 years. They had already accepted him in our lifestyle and were very comfortable with that. So there really was very little resistance. And on the other side, on Norman's family, his mother and I had worked together before, so we knew each other very well prior to our marriage. And she had Norman had been married before and had been married to a Jewish girl, and she had not had a very good relationship with this Jewish person, and then it had evolved into a divorce situation. So she was very receptive to me, even though I wasn't Jewish, when we got married, because it was somebody that she liked and was able to get along with. So she had no resistance to me at all.
Pam, how about your family? How
my
did they
my
respond?
situation was a little different.
Okay.
Because I was away at school, so it meant coming home on a weekend and mustering all the courage I could when it came time on a Sunday morning for the family to go to Mass. And I took that as the opportunity to say, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And the hurt on my father's face, I don't think I'll ever forget. It was stunned. He was stunned. How could you do this? So he left with the words that hang in the air. We'll talk about this later, and you die 1,000 deaths for that later to come. And what I was concerned about was I knew I was hurting them because they did everything right. They gave their family, we had all the traditions in the home, and we were involved with the community, and I had all the education in terms of Catholicism that they could possibly give someone. So how could this be happening? Mm-hmm. And I was the one that was patted on the head as a little girl. I was going to be a sister. So I think this is total turnaround. As we did talk about it, and my father, and this is over a period of months. This isn't the same ominous day. My father realized that I was very serious about this, that I needed to find another balance wheel, to find another way. And then as he saw me studying and trying to find that balance wheel, when I came to the decision of Judaism, my father and mother were both comfortable with it. And they said to me, if you are going to embrace this religion, then you embrace it totally. And that's all we ask, to be the best Jew you can be. And they have subsequently been wonderful and very supportive, and would stand by me when other members of the family really disowned me. And that was wonderful.
Okay, we're going to take a break now. We'll be back to continue with our program, Child of Abraham.
I don't know anything about the Holocaust.
I never heard about this incident.
It should be something in everybody's mind.
You need someone to explain it to you.
Other kids my age should know about it.
I think it's a danger to forget because it doesn't seem like it's very real to us right now.
If they stop talking about it, it's going to happen again and again and again.
For 200 years, our nation's Constitution has guarded our freedom. By defining the powers of the President, Congress, and Supreme Court, it provides a vital role for private organizations such as the American Jewish Committee. For 80 years, we have worked to safeguard the constitutional rights of Jews and all Americans. As our nation's oldest human relations agency, the American Jewish Committee will continue to protect the freedom and dignity of Americans of every race, religion, and ancestry.
Liberty and justice for all.
Our program is Child of Abraham. Our guests, Pat Stolack and Pam Schlosberg. How would you describe the manner in which the Jewish community responded to you?
It's different because...
And I mean, bad or good, you know,
it's been
with
both.
the words.
It's been both. We have traveled a lot. My husband and I have lived in several different states, so we had access to different congregations. And there were congregations that truly did not accept me. And sometimes it was just blatant, where you'd have a stage whisper and I would hear, what is she doing here? Other times it would be a conversation where once they learned, that I was a convert, the conversation stopped or became very cold. When we came to New Jersey, we were very gun-shy about congregations and chose very carefully. And the difference is remarkable. The congregation that I'm a part of now couldn't have been more warm and reached out and wanted me to become a part of the community. And it's been a wonderful love relationship all these 17 or 18 years that we've been a member there.
So you've been with your congregation, member of your congregation in Summit?
Absolutely.
That long?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
And how about you? What did you find in the Jewish community?
Well, my background is only in the Clark community. It's the only temple that I've ever belonged to. It's always been a second home for me. I've always been very well received. From the very first time that I started coming to an adult education class, I made friends, and those people that I met at that time are still very special to me. So we've participated in all the different activities. I've held several different positions. I've always felt very comfortable. We've traveled. I've not really found it to be ever an issue in any of the religious organizations that we belong to or anything. I don't think it's ever been brought up. I sometimes wonder if after 13 years, you know, which was 13 years ago when I converted, I sometimes wonder if anybody really knows that I'm not Jewish, that I wasn't born Jewish. It just became quite accepted and a part of me, and my whole social life really revolves around the synagogue.
I think the fact that both of you really are in leadership roles in your congregations, your respective congregations, says something about the way the community has accepted both of you. How about some of your friends, non-Jewish friends? How did they respond to what you did?
I can only recall one who had quite difficulty with me, wrote me a letter afterwards. I think I had corresponded to her and told her that I had chose to convert, and she found it very difficult because she had come from a very religious Catholic background and just couldn't understand how you could give up one God in order to accept another. And I think that's because that's the way she approached it, and I didn't. To me, I still prayed to the same God. It wasn't that much of a transition. It was just a different way to practice the religion, but basically it was the same God to me, so I didn't find it to be unusual. And I would say that's probably the only one person I can think of that really challenged me and asked, you know, how could you, you know? And I know she just meant just out of curiosity because she couldn't see it within herself to ever do so.
Did you have anything?
I think Pat used the right word when she said curiosity. My non-Jewish friends over the years don't understand why you would do this, why would you convert. And there's this feeling that there's a negative. You're going from a positive to a negative. And there is this misunderstanding or lack of knowledge, so that you're eternally an anomaly to them.
What I'd like to get into is, and it's, in a sense, I guess we could say negative, what are some of the difficulties of a person making this kind of choice? What kind of difficulties do you face?
It's an interesting question. The hardest thing for me is knowing that there's an element in my family that I cannot be a part of. Because as much as a conversion is a rebirth, so to speak, there is this pulling away from the traditions that were a part of your growing up, so that you can't share in the traditions. You can't, and nor can my family really share in my life now. The celebrations that mark the passage of your life, be it a bar bat mitzvah or a seder or a Shabbat, they can come, but you know that they can't really appreciate it like you wish they would. Or I would love to go to Shabbat services on a Friday or Saturday morning and look and to see my family there. That is always, that's a hurt, and that you can't really bridge that. I think that's been the hardest thing for me to come to terms with, and it's been a long time.
How about you?
No, I understand the feelings. We have somewhat bridged that gap somewhat. I find that having Passover Seder, where the majority of the people who are at our table are non-Jewish, is very interesting, because I do have family that share that with me, and I also enjoy sharing Christmas dinner at a relative's house. I think we have a mutual respect for each other's ways, and I think it keeps you from missing out. I think one of the most difficult things for me was that the rabbi that converted me had the belief that Christmas was purely a Christian holiday, and it was to be totally ignored as much as possible. And I found that so difficult that even to the extent that I was trying not to watch the Christmas programs on television, because that was no longer something that I should have an interest in. And for a number of years I felt a real emptiness, because that always was a festive, happy time, and then all of a sudden, you know, that was no longer your holiday, and you therefore just forgot that it even existed, until over the period of time I find that it's no longer a problem, and I don't really find that there are all that many negatives. Maybe I've just been very lucky, or maybe I've just had the right attitude that I've not allowed the negatives to bother me at all. But I've really had very positive experience. Sometimes I would say the one point that I wanted to bring up is that I think a lot of people have difficulty knowing how to approach you if they know that you're a convert. Because of that curiosity that they have, they don't know whether or not to bring up the conversation or how to pursue it. And I think I would advise people to somewhat keep their curiosity to themselves, only because when you bring up the fact that somebody is a convert, you are almost pointing them out, when actually what they want to do is become a part of the community and just to assimilate and to fit in. And if you single them out, I think you hurt them more, because you almost show that the process hasn't worked successfully, because they want to just belong. That's why they became a part of this group. It was a choice that they made, and they don't want to have it singled. I've only been asked once before to speak in front of a group, and I had a number of my friends advise me against it, only because it's a personal thing, and why should you expose yourself, and why should you let people know your innermost thoughts? I do it mostly because I think it's helpful to people to know that to accept somebody who has converted, and never to pressure somebody to make this decision. I feel very strongly about that. I think Pam and I evolved into our beliefs, and that's why we feel so strongly about it. And those people who feel they want to pressure somebody to make this decision, I think they're doing them a real disservice.
Both of you may be aware that in the Jewish tradition, we're really not supposed to identify people as having converted to Judaism. And I must admit that when I was trying to decide about this program, I had that question in mind, and I wasn't sure that we really should. but I would tell you that I discussed it with 3 different rabbis to find out whether we should. And the conclusion was that if we do it with sensitivity, that it's an appropriate thing to do. But you're right in that the tradition is we really are not supposed to go out of our way to identify people as having converted to Judaism. How about some positive experiences? What will you say, if is there anything that stands out as a real positive experience of the whole becoming Jewish?
I feel great. I think that's, I feel very good about myself spiritually, and I think that's the best thing that you can say, is that if you've made a choice that is really a major part of your life, if you feel comfortable with it, I think that's the best and the most positive thing that I can say. And my children are very Jewish oriented. We're very much integrated into the Jewish community. I'm very pleased with that and very comfortable with it. And I couldn't really think of myself living any other way. So I feel personally it's been a real success for me.
I would agree with Pat that the number one benefit is just this feeling of peace or a calm that's come over you, that you know that you are where you're supposed to be. One of the greatest joys that I have is to pass on the traditions to my children, to start new memories with them, so that and it's all afresh and new, and to watch Judaism grow through their eyes is a wonderful experience, and that's a quiet joy. And then the community, belonging to a wonderful community, caring, compassionate, sensitive community that's there, and they have enveloped each other in a very wonderful way that unless you experience it, it's very difficult to even define. Those are some of the highs of converting.
If you were approached by a person who was just beginning to consider the idea, just toying with the idea, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's another difficult question, because it is such a personal search. And I guess the only thing that I would say is to pursue the knowledge, and to have courage, and to trust themselves, because even in the search, the process, you can hear many things that might sway you. I guess it's to be true to yourself and trust yourself and have the courage to continue studying.
Very much the same, just to take your time. Take your time and give it a lot of thought, and get a real feeling inside. You have to go with what your inner voice is telling you. The more you learn, the more you expose yourself to people in the Jewish faith, the more you learn, and the more you can gain from that.
Okay, as we told you, time was going to run out much quicker than we had anticipated. One of the things that we mentioned before was that we had some concern about even doing a program on this subject. And I have to say that, especially taking that into account, I have to thank both of you for having the courage, because it does take a certain amount of courage. But more than anything else, I think that you can help a lot of people, all kinds of people who might be considering this kind of change in their life, or families of children who may be toying with this problem in various aspects. And I think that your understanding and your experience and your sharing with them what you have been through can be a real help to them. So I wish both of you the best of luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
would like to thank our guest for joining us for this program. We hope you will tune in for our next program in the series, Judaism Today. Judaism Today is brought to you by the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and we invite you to write to us at the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036. That's the United Synagogue of America, Deerfield Road and Academy Terrace, Linden, New Jersey, 07036.